I never planned to betray anyone. That's the lie I tell myself when I look back, because plans imply intention, and intention feels cruel. What happened to me felt slower than that. It crept in quietly, wearing familiarity, pretending to be harmless. Why marriage didn't fall apart in a dramatic way. There were no loud arguments, no slammed doors, no accusations thrown like knives. It was worse than that. It became quiet. Too quiet. We lived in the same house but moved through it like strangers who knew each other's schedules by heart. We spoke about groceries, bills, and weather. We stopped talking about feelings so gradually that I didn't notice when they disappeared entirely. That I remember lying awake at night beside my spouse, staring at the ceiling, wondering how loneliness could exist with another body inches away. I felt selfish for feeling that way. After all, nothing was technically wrong. But something was missing, and I didn't know how to name it without sounding ungrateful. That's when the conversation started. Innocent at first. Short messages, shared jokes, complaints about long days. Someone listening. Someone responding. Someone asking how I was and actually waiting for the answer. I told myself it was nothing. Everyone needs a friend, right? But friendships don't make your heart race when your phone lights up. That I noticed the change in myself before anything else. I started smiling at nothing. I carried my phone everywhere. I reread messages late at night, my thumb hovering before replying, choosing words more carefully than I had chosen words for my spouse in years. I felt alive in a way that made me uncomfortable to admit. That I justified it easily. There was no touching. No promises. No confessions of love. Just understanding. Just comfort. Just two people filling gaps they hadn't known how to fill alone. At home, I became quieter. Guilt does that. It turns you inward. I avoided eye contact sometimes, not because my spouse suspected anything, but because I felt like I was carrying a secret too heavy for the room. And yet, instead of stopping, I leaned further into it. Because stopping would mean returning to the emptiness I had escaped the first time we met alone. I told myself it was coincidence. Convenience. Circumstance. I remember how ordinary the moment looked from the outside. Nothing dramatic. Nothing scandalous. And yet my chest felt tight, my palms damp, my thoughts racing ahead of my body. We talked. We laughed. We sat too close. Close enough that I could feel warmth without contact. I remember thinking how strange it was that something so small could feel so dangerous. I also remember thinking how good it felt to be seen. That should have been the moment I walked away. Instead, I stayed. That I started dividing my life into before and afters. Before messages. After messages. Before guilt. After guilt. I told myself I could balance it. That I could keep both worlds separate. That no one would get hurt if no one ever found out. The lies weren't loud. They were subtle. A delayed response. A changed subject. A quiet excuse. The kind of lies that feel more like adjustments than deceptions. I convinced myself that because my spouse hadn't changed, because the house still stood, because routine continued, nothing was truly wrong. But inside, everything had shifted. That I thought about the other person during moments I shouldn't have. During conversations that deserved my attention. During silences that belonged to my marriage. I hated myself for it, and at the same time, I craved it. That contradiction became my constant companion. There was also something else I ignored. The presence of family around us. Familiar footsteps. Familiar voices. People who trusted me. People who never questioned the version of me they believed in. I never once considered what would happen if those worlds collided. That I believed secrets stayed secret if you protected them carefully enough. That I was wrong. I told myself I would stop. That after that moment, that closeness, that dangerous comfort, I would pull back and restore things to how they were supposed to be. I even believed it for a while. Belief is easy when it costs nothing, but restraint requires action, and I kept choosing inaction. The conversations didn't slow down. They deepened. What had once been casual turned intentional. Messages came earlier in the day and lingered late into the night. We spoke about things I no longer spoke about at home. Fears. Regrets. The small disappointments that pile up quietly until they feel too heavy to carry alone. Every time I shared something personal, I felt a brief stab of guilt, followed by relief when I was understood. That relief became addictive. That I began anticipating moments when I could be alone. Not because I wanted isolation, but because solitude meant access. Access to that other world where I felt wanted, interesting, alive. I hated myself for how easily I slipped into it, how naturally it began to feel like a second life running parallel to my real one. That the line didn't disappear all at once. It faded. Blurred so gradually that when I finally crossed it, I couldn't point to a single moment and say, "This is where everything changed." It was a series of small permissions. Sitting closer than necessary. Letting silence stretch without breaking it. Not pulling away when I should have. I remember the first touch clearly, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. It was accidental, or at least we pretended it was. Fingers brushing. A hand lingering half a second too long. My heart raced, but I didn't move. That was the moment choice became action. And I chose wrong. After that, everything accelerated. Guilt grew sharper, but so did desire. I lived in a constant state of contradiction. Part of me was horrified by what I was becoming. Another part felt justified, even entitled. I told myself I had needs. That I had waited long enough. That one moment of happiness didn't erase years of loyalty. That I was wrong again. That I started hiding more carefully. My phone stayed face down. Notifications were silenced. Smiles were suppressed. I learned to compartmentalize so well that sometimes I forgot which version of myself I was supposed to be. The one at home was quieter, more distant. The one outside was warmer, more present. I told myself this balance could last. It couldn't. The first time it became physical beyond doubt, I froze afterward. I remember sitting there, my thoughts loud and chaotic, my chest tight with panic. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This wasn't loneliness reaching out for comfort. This was betrayal. Clear. Undeniable. Heavy that I expected regret to stop me that it didn't. Instead, regret became something I managed. Something I pushed aside when it interfered with how good it felt to be wanted. I learned how quickly the mind adapts when desire is involved. How easily morals bend when you convince yourself no one is being hurt. At home, nothing changed on the surface. That was the cruelest part. Meals were still eaten. Conversations still happened. Familiar routines continued uninterrupted. And because there was no immediate consequence, I started to believe there never would be, but there were cracks. I became distracted. My patience thinned. I answered questions slower, avoided certain topics altogether. I thought I was subtle. I wasn't. I was just lucky. Family moved around us like they always had. Visits. Drop-ins. Laughter from other rooms. Familiar faces that felt safe because they belonged. I never considered how fragile that safety really was. I never imagined how thin the walls between my choices and their consequences had become that I told myself I would end it soon. After one more conversation. One more moment. One more day. Promises are easy when you don't assign them a deadline. Deep down, I sensed it couldn't last. Secrets rot when they're kept too long. They grow heavier, louder. I felt it in my chest sometimes, a constant unease that followed me even in moments of happiness. I ignored it. I always did that. I believed control meant silence, that I didn't realize how close everything was to being exposed, how little it would take for my carefully divided worlds to collide. It happened on a day that was supposed to be ordinary. That's what makes it hard to think about even now. There was no warning in the air, no sense that something was about to collapse. I remember feeling strangely calm, almost careless, the way people feel right before they lose everything. That I thought I had time. The house felt private in that deceptive way familiar places do. The kind of quiet that convinces you you're alone even when you shouldn't be. I wasn't thinking about consequences anymore. Desire has a way of shrinking your world until nothing exists beyond the moment you're in. Then I heard the sound. Footsteps at first. My mind refused to process them. I told myself it was nothing. The house makes noises. Floors creak. Doors shift. I clung to those excuses because acknowledging the truth would have meant facing something I wasn't ready for. The footsteps came closer. My chest tightened. Time slowed in that cruel, unnatural way it does when fear takes over. Every second stretched too long, each one heavy with dread. I wanted to move, to fix something, to undo what was already happening. But my body didn't respond. Panic doesn't always make you run. Sometimes it freezes you in place. The door opened. I didn't need to look to know who it was. I recognized the presence immediately. The weight of it. The familiarity. The way the air in the room changed. When I finally lifted my eyes, Everything inside me dropped. My nephew stood there. There was a pause so long it felt unreal. No shouting. No gasps. Just silence. Thick, suffocating silence. His eyes moved slowly, trying to understand what he was seeing, trying to make sense of something that didn't fit into the version of me he believed in. That I wanted to speak. To say something, anything. To explain, to lie, to beg. But my throat closed. Words felt useless in the face of that look. Shock mixed with confusion. Hurt mixed with disbelief. I had never seen someone lose trust in real time before. That he didn't ask questions, that hurt more than if he had. The moment stretched until it became unbearable. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, loud enough that I wondered if he could hear it too. I thought about all the times he had laughed with me, all the moments of easy familiarity, all the unspoken trust that existed simply because I was family, and I shattered it in seconds. That he took a step back. Then another. His movements were slow, careful, as if sudden motion might make the reality worse. He didn't slam the door. He didn't run. He just left, quietly, taking something with him that I knew I would never get back. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't empty. It was heavy. Accusing. It pressed down on me until I felt like I couldn't breathe. The world didn't end. The house didn't collapse. Everything around me looked exactly the same, but nothing was. I sat there, unable to move, replaying the moment over and over. The way his eyes changed. The way his expression hardened without anger. That was what terrified me most. Anger can pass. Disappointment lingers. Fear finally hit me in full force. Not fear of being caught, not fear of consequences, but fear of what I had done to someone innocent. Someone who hadn't asked to be part of my secrets. Someone who would never see me the same way again. That I imagined him telling someone. I imagined the looks, the questions, the fallout. My mind spiraled through every possible outcome, each one worse than the last. And yet, beneath all that fear, there was something else, shame, pure and absolute. That I realized then how fragile my control had been. How foolish I was to believe I could keep everything contained. One open door was all it took. One wrong moment. One witness that I had crossed a line I could never uncross, and as the silence settled around me, I understood that the worst part wasn't exposure. It was knowing that even if no one ever spoke about what happened, nothing would ever be the same again. After that day, everything continued as if nothing had happened, and that was the most unbearable part. The house still woke up at the same time. Meals were still prepared. Conversations still took place. Laughter still appeared where it always had. But beneath it all, something rotten spread quietly, touching everything. That my nephew never said a word. That he didn't confront me. He didn't expose me. He didn't even avoid me completely. That silence became its own kind of punishment. When our eyes met, they didn't linger. When we were in the same room, the air felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. I could feel the distance even when he was only a few steps away. That I started noticing things I had never noticed before. The way he left rooms earlier than he used to. The way conversations ended abruptly when I walked in. The way his laughter sounded different, restrained, like something held back. Every small change felt intentional, even when it probably wasn't. Paranoia took root quickly. That I replayed the moment endlessly, analyzing every detail, every expression, every movement. I wondered what he thought of me now. Whether he felt disgust, anger, confusion, or all of it tangled together. I wondered if he hated me, or worse, if he had lost respect in a way that could never be repaired. That night, sleep became difficult. Silence amplified everything. My thoughts grew louder in the dark, cruel and relentless. I imagined conversations that never happened. Confessions that might come. Consequences that hovered just out of reach. I flinched at every unexpected sound, every raised voice, every shift in tone. Nothing came, and somehow, that made it worse. That I tried to convince myself that time would fix it. That memories fade. That people move on. But deep down, I knew better. Some things don't fade. They settle. They become part of how you see someone forever. The relationship I had risked everything for began to feel different too. The excitement dulled, replaced by anxiety. Moments that once felt intoxicating now felt tainted. I couldn't separate desire from fear anymore. Every interaction carried the weight of what had been witnessed. That I started withdrawing. Not just from that relationship, but from everything. Conversations felt forced. Smiles felt rehearsed. I felt like I was living inside a fragile structure that could collapse at any moment, held together only by silence and avoidance. At home, my spouse noticed something was off, even if they couldn't name it. I became distant, distracted, irritable. I answered questions vaguely. I avoided closeness, not out of lack of feeling, but because guilt had made intimacy unbearable. Every normal moment felt undeserved. I thought about confessing more than once. I imagined sitting down, speaking the truth, letting everything fall apart honestly instead of waiting for it to explode. But fear always won. Fear of destruction. Fear of judgment. Fear of being seen exactly as I was. So I stayed quiet. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The secret didn't disappear. It just became heavier. It followed me everywhere, coloring every interaction, every decision. I learned how exhausting it is to maintain a version of yourself that no longer feels real. My nephew's silence never broke. And I began to understand that it wasn't mercy. It was distance. A line drawn without words. He had seen something he couldn't unsee, and instead of reacting, he had chosen to step back, to protect himself from whatever version of me existed now. That realization hurt more than any confrontation could have. That I lost something that day that I couldn't name properly. Trust, maybe. Or innocence. Or the comfort of believing that mistakes stay private. I learned how fragile relationships are when built on assumptions, how quickly they fracture when reality intrudes. That I still don't know if he will ever speak about what he saw. I live with that uncertainty every day. It sits quietly in the background of my life, a constant reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. That if there's one thing I understand now, it's this: betrayal doesn't always end with exposure. Sometimes it ends with silence, and that silence follows you far longer than any words ever could.